Hey, joining us right now via phone is Mark Mills, Senior Fellow at the Manhattan Institute and Faculty Fellow at Northwestern University's McCormick School of Engineering and Applied Science. He's also he's a host of a podcast called The Last Optimist. He's written a couple of books as well, and he is someone who I consider, and many consider, an expert on energy, the future, technology, and all the rest. Mark, welcome to the program. Good morning, Mark. How are you?
Doing great.
Thanks for joining us. We really appreciate your time today. Let's talk about this green new world that we're expected to live in. I saw a video not that long ago, actually, of a couple of car enthusiasts over in England. They were testing out just how efficient electric vehicles were. They tested the same make and model. One version was gas powered, one version was battery powered, and it turned out they saved more money with a gas powered one. And I found that very, very fascinating. And then, of course, I've seen lots of your interviews with John Stossel and many others, and your work on Prager University, talking about how this EV future, this green future, this renewable future is not the utopia that many believe it could be. In fact, it could be a dystopia. How do we see this push for a green, environmentally friendly electric vehicle future, Mark Mills?
It's a big question. So it depends how we define the word green. Unfortunately, that's just the reality of what's going on. First, everybody is defining green as meaning lowering carbon dioxide emissions or burning fewer hydrocarbons. But in the old world, which was many years ago, we talked about green in terms of how much land we use, how much minerals we dug out of the earth, where things were mined, all the different forms of pollution and conveniences that come with every machine. The bottom line is the electric car is really quite a remarkable option for a lot of people. And there'll be lots more electric cars in the world. But they aren't zero emissions. They just emit something elsewhere. They can actually lead to higher emissions elsewhere. They aren't cheaper by any measure. In fact, the least cost new electric car costs twice as much as the least cost new internal combustion engine car. So they're expensive, and they're getting more expensive. And I guess we could add to the woes the things that you need to mine and refine to manufacture batteries, which is obviously essential for a battery-powered vehicle. But those things aren't mined in America or very much in Europe, elsewhere, and all the refining, well, at least 2/3 of it, is done in China. So there's a very interesting geopolitical swap. But your review that you saw of a couple of car testers in the UK finding that driving electric vehicles is more expensive, it's actually true. If you look at how most people will refuel their vehicle, that is, if they drive on the road and use these so-called fast chargers, those are very expensive and lead to higher cost for operations than just filling up with expensive gasoline.
You know, I find it interesting because there is they sort of started to figure things out about Americans and how we think of cars. Unlike, I think, the rest of the world, in America, a car is an extension of our personality. We want our cars to say something about who we are, what we think of ourselves. I think it's not so much the case in other parts of the world. So, like, for instance, the Hummer EV. Now, that's a car. I mean, good grief. I can drag race in that thing, and I can crab walk on the side of a mountain. I mean, it's pretty fantastic. I could probably get behind an EV like that. But the reality is, in order to provide for that kind of technology, there is a lot at stake there that I think that you've already spoken to so far that we as Americans don't pay any attention to. You said China. We don't like mining in America. We don't want mining in our backyard because we know it's an eyesore. It's harmful to the environment. I mean, it's okay if that harms Africans and mines owned by China in Africa or in mines in China that are managed by, Uyghurs or other people, but just not in my backyard. There's a great hypocrisy in this Green New Deal. Mark, are you there? We might have lost Mark Mills. Mark, if you can hear me.
Can you hear me?
There you go. Did you hear my question, Mark?
Yeah, you make a very good point first about the psychology of automobiles. I mean, if everybody had the same view of what kind of car they would like and how they would use a car, there might be 2 or 3 models of cars in the entire world. There are thousands of models of cars for different uses, different personalities, different places that you might want to use it, it's really quite remarkable. The electric vehicle is in effect another model of car, another option you could have. Is like back before you could choose have an automatic transmission or a stick shift. That was an option. Now you can choose between an engine or an electric motor with a battery, but still a car though. And to your point that a lot of people in the world view cars differently than we do. Here's how they view it differently. They don't have cars.
Yeah.
We live in a country, and Europe's the same, where there are more cars owned by people than there are licensed drivers. We're wealthy nations. We've got lots of cars. In the rest of the world, there's on average roughly 80 people per car. So they're underserved by cars. They're eager to get access to have one because of the freedom it gives, the economic freedom, the personal freedom, all the mobilities that are obvious to us. So they're looking for the cheapest car first. Right? Their first car is going to be an inexpensive car, whether it's a low-cost new car or a second-hand car, which is where many of our vehicles go when we think they're used up. And so that's sort of the first, we'll call it social equity issue that gets lost in this. We're excited about expensive new options. The rest of the world, billions of people, are eager to get access to any vehicle. And I'll say it again, look, the cheapest electric car is still twice as expensive as the cheapest internal combustion engine. And that's because of the battery itself is so stunningly expensive. It's a 1,000-pound fuel tank to replace 80 pounds of gasoline.
Wow.
To manufacture the 1,000-pound fuel tank, I have to dig up about 500,000 pounds of the earth to get the minerals somewhere.
500,000 pounds, you say?
500,000 pounds per car of digging up rocks to make one car's battery. And to your point, we've chased the mining industry out of this country. In fact, the last year, this administration has canceled permits that were multi-million dollars and years in pursuit. Just canceled these permits for a copper. I think there's one copper and a couple of I think it'd been nickel mine, a couple copper mines and nickel mine. One in Minnesota, one as I recall in Arizona, probably New Mexico. So even as we're pushing for more electric cars and subsidizing them here, we're making it hard for miners to produce the metals that are needed to make them. And the other countries who are willing to do that, to your point, in many cases, there are parts of the world where they not only don't have labor laws or unions to help protect workers. They use enforced labor in some places. They use notoriously child labor. We know this, and we know that we're creating increased demand for those kinds of mines by subsidizing electric cars in Europe and America. It's I guess you could say it's a deeply immoral trade.
Yeah, it would seem so. We're talking about the electric brave new world that we're going to be seeing. It almost seems one way or the other. I mean, they're pretty determined at this point to bring about, places like California, Governor Newsom out there is determined to force Californians to accept this brave new electric world. But it begs the question, they've got rolling brownouts now. How are they going to handle this? I mean, do solar and wind, do these things, are they capable of providing? They didn't even provide Texans with enough electricity a year before last. How is California going to fare with all electric vehicles and rolling brownouts? Mark Mills, what say you?
Oh, not well. Sure, not well at all. In fact, there's a certain schadenfreude to the fact that within days of the announcement that California has joined a number of other states and other countries in this bizarre mania to ban the sale of internal combustion engines. It's really quite something. Well, at a very high level of abstraction, roughly the same amount of energy is used by road vehicles as the total electric grid now uses in the United States. So, or put differently, you have to roughly double the electric grid to transfer all transportation over to using electricity instead of burning oil.
roughly speaking. That's not being planned by anyone. In fact, we're going to be underserved with electricity because precisely of the mandates to build more wind and solar instead of more conventional power plants. So it's a plan that will lead to more frequent announcements, like just happened that you referred to, that where the government or the utility operators will say, not only all of us have experienced, please don't use your air conditioners, it's a hot day. We'll have, please don't drive your car or don't charge your car, it's a hot day, or inversely in the cold climate, it's a cold day. It's not impossible to build enough electric capacity to charge the cars. It just takes money and time.
Yeah.
Like everything else.
A lot.
It just takes money and time. A lot of money.
And you know what's interesting is there's no actual reduction in fossil fuel use in a brave new electric car world. I mean, just in general, like you just pointed out, they fill these cars up with coal-powered, electricity chargers, not solar powered, not wind power. That's not doing the trick. It's still coal. Why not nuclear power? That is a renewable energy, apparently, that nobody wants anymore. I'm not sure why. And then, of course, you still need fossil fuels to ship all that battery technology across the ocean. You still need fossil fuels to lube the bearings and all the other components of these vehicles that move. They're not going to be lubed with electricity, out of a solar-powered generator of any kind. It seems naive at best, but on the worst side of that spectrum, manipulative. I mean, do we think we're that dumb that we wouldn't understand that fossil fuels aren't going to be reduced by all this?
Well, maybe we are that dumb. I don't know.
Ouch.
But let's divide the point you made into two big buckets, so to speak, of the need for fossil fuels or hydrocarbons, oil, gas, and coal, to make everything, including green machines, and then the use of hydrocarbons to charge the green machines, let's say. And people do know that it depends where you live and when you charge your car, what kind of electricity you're putting in the battery, so to speak. If you live in China, which has half of the world's electric cars, its electric grid is 2/3 coal-fired, and at night it's mostly coal-fired.
Wow.
Maybe close to 80 or 90% in some parts of the country. That means that you're precisely right. Those electric cars are coal-fired cars, like the trains of the 19th century. If you live in Norway, with their 80% hydropower grid, I mean, it's a country with a population of Manhattan, so they have an easier lift, so to speak. But then you're charging with hydropower. If you live in California and you charge the car at night, in certain parts of the state at the right time of the year or evening, you're charging with wind power. If you live in New England, during midday, you're probably charged with natural gas. The point is, if the government wants to make sure that you charge your car with the allowed form of electricity, then we'll put control systems on the chargers and in your car and make it impossible for you to charge your car except when you're using the permitted form of electricity. Technically possible, a profound intrusion on your convenience and your freedoms, but it's technically possible. We'll just change the car from being a really convenient, drive anytime, anywhere mobility device into a permission-driven mobility device, which gets to your point of control that the government would be able to have over your life. So if we do the averages, then given the electric grid we have, and we will have for many, many, many years, you're absolutely right that in America, because roughly 2/3 of electricity comes from burning gas and oil, natural gas and oil, that means your electric car is burning natural gas and oil, on average. And again, in China, it's coal. In Poland, it's often coal. And in Norway and Denmark, wind and hydro. But it varies around the world. But it still emits something somewhere else, right? The second energy hydrocarbon part is that 1,000-pound battery that takes 500,000 pounds of rock to be excavated, to get to the minerals, to make the copper and the aluminum, that's all done with big oil-burning machines. And big, big machines powered by electricity on coal-fired grids and gas-fired grids and oil-fired grids in Africa grind up the rock,
use hydrocarbon-based chemicals to dissolve the rock to get the metals, use hydrocarbons to refine the metals and make the chemicals. And you do so much of that hydrocarbon-based activity that the amount of carbon dioxide you emit just making the battery can wipe up from a half to even all of the CO2 emissions that you eliminate by not burning gasoline.
Wow.
Which is not me. I'm not making these numbers up, by the way. Even, God bless them, Volkswagen has at their website a study that they published that lays out these facts, that in the ideal model that they play out, even there, the first 60,000 miles you drive one of their electric vehicles, they will tell you you're emitting more CO2 than if you just drove the diesel-powered SUV.
Wow. That's incredible. Mr. Mills, I have a question here about the rollout of this green agenda, right? So certain places, like, for example, Europe, I think is going for 2030. Certain states here in the United States, like California, going for 2030 to roll out this green agenda where you wouldn't be manufacturing any new cars that are driven by fossil fuels. What does that look like, practically? Or is it going to be impossible for us to get the engines that were around? Are we just not going to have enough fuel to go around? How does that? Because that's going to affect the supply and demand of the fuel industry.
Well, let's stipulate governments can do almost anything they want, right? I mean, governments in Sovietized economies, command and control. We've learned in the last couple of years, government has a lot of power, command and control. So how this will work out is one of two ways. If they keep the ban in place, there will be a shortage of cars. We won't be making enough electric vehicles because we can't mine enough material. The International Energy Agency has pointed out the average time to open a new mine is 16 years. And the world needs to increase the number of mines and mining just to build battery by somewhere between 400% and 4,000%, depending on the scenario you have.
Wow.
The world is not planning to open that many new mines. And if the world's miners decided tomorrow to do that, it would take over a decade to have those mines get open, which is a long way of saying we're not going to be mining enough material to make that many batteries. So what's the effect of it? Well, used cars will become extremely expensive because people keep their old conventional vehicle. So those will become expensive. Maintenance costs will go up. Maintenance charges will go up. And the overall cost of transportation will go up, which will impact not the rich, which can happily afford the most reliable conventional vehicle and pay for maintenance. It'll affect middle class and the poor, who will face higher costs for transportation, not just a little higher, but if you're outright banning, if the government's leave in place a ban on new internal combustion engines, you'll create incredibly high prices, black market in conventional cars. You'll see all kinds of workarounds for people traveling to an adjacent state to buy a new conventional vehicle, unless the federal government bans it. And if the federal government bans it, I guess you'll find old freighters bringing in illegal used cars. Who knows? People will go to the junkyards to rebuild cars.
It's like Mad Max.
Yeah,
Mad Max. Your brain's going the same places.
Yeah. Well, I've seen trains of junker cars being towed to Mexico. And we'll
reverse that.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was thinking. They're going to reverse. They're going to start bringing them back our way. How many cars have I sold that have ended up in Mexico? But we're down to about just a minute and a half here with Mark Mills from the Manhattan Institute. Okay, so let me just ask this question here. Europe's facing an energy crisis right now. Why won't they embrace nuclear technology? What is the big hang-up with nuclear technology? Is this just one of those follow the money, who's getting paid and who's getting rich kind of deals? Or is there a real issue with nuclear technology that most of us have not considered?
I hate the answer. It's complicated because in this case, it is a melange of myths that began at the dawn of the nuclear age. People are afraid of radiation because it's invisible. I understand that. But we know a lot about radioactivity. It's one of the best and most deeply studied areas of biological science. It's remarkable. But the environmental groups, by and large, despise nuclear energy, have opposed it vigorously. We have a regulatory regime that's hostile to nuclear energy, like it is hostile mining. But there is more promise in reducing mankind's footprint to provide energy using nuclear fission than any single approach to producing energy for society. We increase the call on minerals by over 1,000% if we go from conventional fuels to solar, wind, and batteries. We decrease it by that amount by going to nuclear fission. It's an astonishingly remarkable form of producing energy. And the good news is there's at least 6 dozen, not six, not a dozen, but 6 dozen different new designs for nuclear power plants that the International Atomic Energy Agency has itemized. So we have the engineering capacity to accelerate that. We should accelerate that in Europe and the United States. And imagine a power plant that you could bury below a city. The power plant is, say, the size of 4 or 5 shipping containers, has an on-off switch, and runs the city for 40 years.
Would be nice.
That's not crazy.
Yeah, but we're out of time. Mark Mills, thank you for your time. He is the author of a book called The Cloud Revolution, How the Convergence of New Technologies Will Unleash the Next Economic Boom and the Roaring 2020s. You can find more information at manhattan-institute.org. Mark, God bless you. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you. God bless you.
All right, that's going to do it. Share-a-thon is coming up in our second hour, 9 a.m. Central, 10 Eastern, but it starts all across the GRN next. Otherwise, see you back here tomorrow morning.